April 24th, 1944. Willow Run, Michigan. The morning sun broke across the vast expanse of the world's largest factory under one roof, illuminating 3.5 million square feet of coordinated industrial choreography. Inside, 42,000 workers moved with practiced precision along an assembly line that stretched more than a mile through the building's L-shaped interior. Every 63 minutes, another B-24 Liberator heavy bomber rolled under its own power out of the massive doors and onto the adjacent airfield. 100 miles away, in a bunker beneath the streets of Berlin, German intelligence officers studied reconnaissance photographs with growing alarm. The images showed row after endless row of 4-engine bombers lined up at American airfields. The analyst's hands trembled slightly as he calculated the numbers. His pencil scratched across the report form. Production estimate for single facility designated Willow Run, approximately 450 aircraft per month. Peak daily production, 18 complete bombers. The officer reviewing the report shook his head and drew a line through the figures. Impossible, he wrote in the margin. American propaganda. No single factory could produce such numbers. The analyst had made an error. It must be corrected before submission to the High Command. But the analyst had not made an error. If anything, he had underestimated. Ford Motor Company's Willow Run bomber plant would reach a production rate of 650 B-24 Liberators per month by autumn of 1944, one complete heavy bomber every 45 minutes. The scale was so extreme that German military intelligence literally could not believe their own reconnaissance data. The story of how an automobile company built the most productive aircraft factory in history, and why Nazi Germany's leadership refused to accept the evidence of American industrial might, reveals a fatal miscalculation that would help determine the outcome of World War II. The tale begins not in Michigan, but in sunny California, where the fundamental impossibility of mass-producing bombers was about to be challenged by a man who built cars. Early 1941. San Diego, California. Charles Sorensen, Vice President of Production for Ford Motor Company, walked through the consolidated aircraft factory with barely concealed frustration. Around him, men worked on sections of the B-24 Liberator bomber, using methods that seemed to belong to a previous century. There were no blueprints in the traditional sense, just sketches and drawings and templates. Workers custom-fitted each component. The final assembly took place outdoors under the bright California sun, where heat and temperature changes distorted the structural steel fixtures so severely that no two planes emerged identical without extensive additional adjustment. Sorensen had revolutionized automobile production at Ford. He understood mass manufacturing, with an intimacy few men possessed. What he witnessed at Consolidated Aircraft offended every principle of efficient production he had spent decades perfecting. "This is how we built cars 35 years ago at Ford," he told his hosts with barely concealed frustration. The Consolidated executives bristled at the criticism. Their response was natural and proper. How would you do it? Sorensen needed to put up or shut up. "I'll have something for you tomorrow morning," he promised. That night, in his hotel room at the Hotel del Coronado, Sorensen began one of the most consequential all-nighters of the war. He spread notes and calculations across every surface. He listed every major unit of the B-24 and all the subunits and fractional units required for assembly. He gathered figures on Consolidated's labor force and job performance. From these, he computed each unit operation, its timing, and required floor space as he envisioned them. Paper flew. Figures for each unit he kept together in separate piles. Soon, little stacks of paper covered the floor of his room. The B-24 Liberator was an extraordinarily complex machine. It contained approximately 1,550,000 parts compared to roughly 15,000 parts in an automobile. 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, a wingspan of 110 feet, a length of 68 feet, maximum loaded weight of 65,000 pounds, capacity to carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs, a crew of 11 men, 10 50-caliber machine guns for defense, Fuel tanks integrated into the wings, holding thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline. Complex hydraulic systems, electrical systems, navigation equipment, bomb release mechanisms, oxygen systems for high-altitude flight. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 2. Compare a Ford automobile with a 4-engine Liberator bomber was like matching a garage with a skyscraper. The differences were immense. But Sorensen understood that the same fundamentals applied to high-volume production of both, the same as they would to an electric egg beater or a wristwatch. First, break the plane's design into essential units and make a separate production layout for each unit. Next, build as many units as required, then deliver each unit in its proper sequence to the assembly line to make one complete finished plane. To house all this and provide for efficient operation, there should be a new plant specially designed to accommodate the progressive layout. Sorensen saw the possibility of one B-24 every hour instead of one B-24 every month by the prevailing method. He knew he had the solution. More than that, he felt certain that the Germans had neither the facilities nor the conception for greater bomber mass production. This gave him tremendous confidence. America could win an air war through sheer productive capacity if someone could just figure out how to apply automobile manufacturing principles to aircraft construction. Toward 4 o'clock in the morning, Sorensen was satisfied that his piles of paper represented the most logical progress of units to the main assembly line. He knew he could prove a construction rate of one big bomber every hour. Standing over his papers, he roughed out on Coronado Hotel notepaper a pencil sketch of the floor plan of a bomber plant. It would be 1 mile long and a 1/4 mile wide, the biggest single industrial building ever constructed. That sketch, initialed by Edsel Ford and his sons and others, became the true outline of Willow Run. The result of one night's hard work would take 2 years to build, and would come through on schedule with one 4-engine Liberator every hour, 18 bombers per day, and by the end of the war, a total of 8,685 bombers. At breakfast, with Edsel Ford the next morning, Sorensen was somewhat woozy from lack of sleep as he showed the sketch and outlined the bomber-an-hour proposition. Edsel Ford gave his complete accord and assured Sorensen that Ford Motor Company would build such a plant. They spent an hour together getting set for a meeting in Major Fleet's office to present a $200 million proposition backed only by a penciled sketch. The proposal was audacious beyond measure. Aviation manufacturers dismissed it immediately. Established aircraft makers knew that bombers required skilled craftsmen and careful hand-fitting. The idea of an assembly line producing complete heavy bombers every hour seemed preposterous. Industry veterans called Sorensen's claims impossible fantasy. But Edsel Ford believed. The Roosevelt administration, desperate for aircraft production, believed. The government would contribute $200 million. Ford would contribute engineering expertise and management. Ground was broken in the spring of 1941. The site was farmland, owned by Henry Ford on the eastern edge of Michigan's Washtenaw County, near a creek called Willow Run. Architect Albert Kahn, who specialized in industrial design, translated Sorensen's hotel sketches into the most ambitious factory building project in history. The main structure would cover 3.5 million square feet of factory space. The assembly line would stretch over a mile. The factory was designed L-shaped because extending it in a straight line would have crossed into neighboring Wayne County, where property taxes were higher. 4 large turntables 2/3 along the assembly line would allow the B-24 production lines to make a 90-degree turn before continuing to final assembly. This created the largest room under one roof anywhere in the world at that time. Adjacent to the factory, an airfield with 6 runways would allow completed bombers to be flight tested immediately. Barracks would house up to 1,300 pilots and aircrew members who would sleep on cots waiting for their B-24 seconds to roll off the assembly line. The plant would include its own power generation, its own fire department, its own hospital. An apprentice school would train up to 8,000 students per week who would complete training and report directly to work on the line. Construction proceeded at breakneck pace through late 1941 and early 1942. Then came the reality check. Ford received permission in October of 1941 to produce complete Liberators rather than just components. The first complete B-24 emerged from Willow Run on October 1, 1942. It was christened the Spirit of Ypsilanti. But this first plane represented the beginning of a nightmare rather than a triumph. The problems were immediate and severe. Consolidated Aircraft had never provided real blueprints. They worked from sketches and templates and constantly modified designs, based on combat experience and military requirements. Ford's production methods depended on fixed designs where each component was standardized and identical. Every design modification required expensive and time-consuming updates to the entire assembly line. Ford assigned 200 engineers to work in shifts around the clock 7 days a week, producing actual engineering drawings from Consolidated's materials. They generated 5 miles of drawings per day. 10,000 of the 30,000 drawings they made were obsolete by the time they got back to Detroit from San Diego, because Consolidated had changed the airplane, while Ford's engineers were still documenting the original and design. This gave Ford a 6-month delay in their production schedule because all the tooling they designed no longer worked. The difficulties mounted. The precision required for aircraft manufacturing exceeded automobile tolerances. A car door off by 1/16 of an inch might close poorly. An aircraft wing assembled with similar tolerances would create fatal aerodynamic problems. Ford engineers had to develop entirely new quality control systems and measurement techniques. Distance created workforce challenges. Willow Run sat 30 miles west of Detroit. Workers were reluctant to commute such distances, especially with wartime gasoline rationing. Housing near the plant was virtually non-existent. The government rushed to build temporary housing, including trailer parks, dormitories, and prefabricated units. Still, attracting sufficient workers proved difficult. Henry Ford had long resisted employing women in his factories. He believed their place was in the home, but desperate necessity forced change. By May of 1942, 15% of Willow Run's workforce was women earning the same wages as men for the same jobs. Many had never worked in factories before. They learned to rivet aluminum sheets, install hydraulic systems, operate precision machinery. The plant struggled through 1942. Only 56 airplanes were built in the entire year. The media was watching closely and growing critical. The Detroit newspapers, which had initially boasted about Ford's ambitious plans, began running skeptical stories. Critics took to calling the facility "Will It Run?" in mocking reference to its troubled production. Senator Harry Truman, heading a presidential committee charged with eliminating wartime production waste, visited Willow Run in February of 1943. He was unimpressed. Truman didn't want excuses. He wanted finished bombers. The scrutiny was intense and embarrassing. Ford's reputation, built on the revolutionary Model T assembly line, was at stake. The company that had changed manufacturing forever now seemed unable to deliver on its most ambitious promise. Behind the scenes, however, Ford's engineers were methodically solving problems. They broke the complex bomber into 11 major assemblies and further divided these into 69 sub-assemblies. Each sub-assembly was built on its own production line, then moved to the main assembly line in precise choreographed sequence. The center wing assembly became the breakthrough achievement. This massive component contained fuel tanks, supported the engines, and held the main landing gear. It was the structural heart of the bomber. Ford developed a revolutionary automated process. Pre-constructed wing components underwent precision machining, where a single multifunction machine completed 42 precision operations to within 2/10,000ths of an inch in just 17 minutes. Steel dies replaced the soft metal dies traditionally used in aircraft manufacturing. Industry experts had warned that steel dies might damage delicate aluminum components. Ford proved them wrong. Steel dies were more precise, longer lasting, and perfectly safe. More importantly, they allowed true mass production tolerances. As 1943 progressed, The numbers began climbing. 37 planes in January, 70 in February, 96 in March, 146 in April. On November 3rd, 1943, employees celebrated as Willow Run produced its 1,000th finished B-24 bomber. The corner had been turned. The naysayers were being proven wrong. By early 1944, Willow Run hit its stride. In April of that year, employees working 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days per week, produced 453 airplanes in 468 hours. This represented a production rate of 1 finished B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Charles Sorensen's brash claim was no longer an empty boast. Willow Run and its workers met their goal. The peak came on April 26, 1944, when 100 complete bombers flew away from Willow Run in a single 72-hour period. Pilots waited in barracks for their aircraft. When a bomber was finished, a pilot and crew would take it up for flight testing, then fly it to a military base or port for deployment overseas. The sky above Ypsilanti Township filled with 4-engine bombers circling for position. Local residents grew accustomed to the constant roar of hundreds of aircraft engines. Employment peaked at 42,000 workers. By summer of 1944, women comprised approximately 1/3 of the workforce. The iconic Rosie the Riveter poster was modelled partly on Roswell Monroe, an actual riveter at Willow Run. These women worked shifts around the clock. They mastered skills traditionally reserved for men. They maintained production schedules that determined whether their sons and husbands and brothers would have the equipment needed to survive combat. The factory operated as a small city. The apprentice school provided training equivalent to a community college technical program. A full-sized mock-up of the Liberator's structure built from plywood allowed students to learn component installation before touching actual aircraft. Training was intensive and practical. Upon completion, students reported directly to stations on the assembly line. The cafeteria served thousands of meals per shift. Medical facilities treated injuries and illnesses. Fire departments stood ready. The power plant generated electricity for the massive operation. Transportation systems moved materials and components through carefully orchestrated routes. Every hour, materials worth hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed into the plant. Trucks arrived with aluminum sheets from Alcoa, engine nacelles from suppliers in Ohio, instruments from New York, hydraulic components from California, tires from Akron. The logistics alone represented an organizational achievement that rivaled the manufacturing process itself. As production peaked, Willow Run achieved remarkable efficiency. The cost to produce a B-24 had been approximately $238,000 per aircraft in 1942. By 1944, through improved efficiency and mass production techniques, the cost fell to approximately $137,000 per aircraft, a 42% cost reduction achieved while dramatically increasing production speed and maintaining quality. By September of 1944, employees celebrated the completion of their 6,000th airplane. Ford now planned to build 650 planes each month, one every 45 minutes. But just when that milestone seemed possible, the government drastically cut its order for B-24 seconds. The war's focus was shifting. In Europe, Allied armies were advancing across France toward Germany. The strategic bombing campaign had achieved air superiority. In the Pacific, longer-range B-29 Superfortress bombers were entering service for operations against Japan. The army literally told Ford to slow down. "We have no place to park them. Combat losses haven't been what we expected." Production was deliberately reduced to 200 bombers per month. After years of struggle and criticism, after finally achieving the impossible production rates that experts said could never happen, Ford was told to throttle back because they had built too many bombers, too efficiently. Tragically, Edsel Ford never saw Willow Run reach full production. He died on May 26, 1943, just 49 years old. Stomach cancer, exacerbated by the stress of managing the bomber plant during its difficult early period, took his life 6 months before the facility vindicated his faith. His vision and leadership had been instrumental in transforming the troubled plant into the world's most productive bomber factory. The last B-24 rolled off the Willow Run assembly line on June 28, 1945. Total production reached 8,685 complete bombers. Additionally, Willow Run produced knockdown kits for approximately 1,893 more aircraft. These were complete disassembled bombers that could be shipped overseas in cargo holds and assembled at forward bases near combat zones. This solved critical logistics problems and allowed rapid replacement of combat losses without consuming fuel-flying bombers across oceans. In total, Ford built almost half of all B-24 Liberators produced during the war. The total B-24 production across all manufacturers reached approximately 18,482 aircraft, making it the most produced heavy bomber in history. Willow Run alone produced more heavy bombers than the entire aviation industry of Japan managed during the war. The numbers were so extreme they seemed like propaganda. German intelligence officers who received reports of American aircraft production dismissed them as impossible exaggerations. No nation could produce such numbers, they reasoned. The reports must be inflated, Allied propaganda, designed to damage German morale. The mathematics seemed to support German skepticism. Before the war, America had produced fewer than 3,000 military aircraft annually. The infrastructure barely existed. The workforce had no experience. How could a single automobile factory in Michigan transform itself into a facility producing heavy bombers faster than Germany's entire aviation industry combined? What German intelligence failed to understand was that American mass production represented a revolutionary approach to manufacturing that German industry had never fully embraced. Ford's system didn't depend on skilled craftsmen performing traditional tasks. It broke complex products into simple, repetitive operations that workers could master quickly through intensive, focused training. Quality came through precision tooling and measurement, rather than through individual craftsmen's judgment. Speed came through coordination and timing, rather than through individual workers racing to complete tasks. The German aviation industry still relied heavily on skilled craftsmen. Each aircraft required extensive hand-fitting. Components were adjusted individually. Production was fundamentally artisanal despite occurring in factories. Quality was excellent, but quantity was limited by the number of skilled workers available. The Luftwaffe's shortage of aircraft stemmed not from lack of factories or raw materials, but from manufacturing methods that could not achieve the scale American industry had mastered. When Consolidated Aircraft's B-24 design was being developed, nobody imagined mass production on Ford's scale. The original production method at Consolidated's San Diego plant produced approximately 1 B-24 per week, with extensive outdoor assembly under California sun. At peak efficiency before Ford's involvement, Consolidated might produce 40 to 50 Liberators per month. Ford produced more in 3 days. The strategic implications were staggering. Each B-24 that rolled off. Willow Run's assembly line represented thousands of pounds of bombs that would fall on German industry, transportation networks, and military targets. Each bomber carried a crew of 11 American airmen who would risk their lives attacking the Third Reich's capacity to wage war. The faster America produced bombers, the faster German industrial capacity could be destroyed, the faster air superiority could be achieved, the faster the war could be won. German military planners understood the theoretical importance of industrial capacity. But Nazi ideology provided a framework that reinterpreted evidence in ways that fit predetermined conclusions. America was portrayed in German propaganda as a weak mongrel nation corrupted by racial diversity and Jewish influence. How could such a society possibly outproduce the racially pure and ideologically unified German Reich? The very suggestion seemed absurd to those who believed Nazi racial theories. Adolf Hitler himself had expressed nothing but contempt for American industrial and military potential. In private conversations recorded in his table talks, the Führer declared that American society was half Judaized and half negrified. How could one expect such a state to hold together? He asked rhetorically. This wasn't casual rhetoric for propaganda purposes. Hitler genuinely believed these racial theories shaped German strategic planning at the highest levels. Hermann Göring, Reich Marshal and head of the Luftwaffe, famously claimed that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades. They would never be able to produce military equipment sufficient to defeat Germany, he insisted. This dismissive attitude reflected genuine belief rather than mere wartime bluster. German leadership convinced themselves that racial diversity weakened nations, that Jewish influence corrupted societies, that democracy made countries militarily impotent. When reconnaissance aircraft photographed endless rows of B-24 seconds at American airfields. When intelligence reports detailed production figures from facilities like Willow Run, German analysts faced a choice: accept the evidence and revise their ideological assumptions, or reject the evidence and maintain their beliefs. At every level of command, Nazi leadership chose to maintain their ideology. The numbers must be exaggerated, the aircraft must be inferior quality, American industry must be including training aircraft and obsolete models in their statistics. The reality could not possibly match the claims. This systematic dismissal of contradictory evidence created catastrophic strategic miscalculation. By mid-1944, American industry was producing approximately two-thirds of all Allied military equipment. This meant American factories supplied not just American forces, but significant portions of British, Soviet, and other Allied militaries through the Lend-Lease program. The scale of productive capacity that German intelligence reported was not exaggerated but actually understated in some categories. The B-24 seconds built at Willow Run flew combat missions across every theatre of war. In Europe, they conducted strategic bombing campaigns against German industrial targets, oil refineries, transportation networks, and military installations. The 8th Air Force, based in England, operated hundreds of Liberators. On single missions, more than 1,000 B-24 seconds might attack German positions simultaneously. Each bomber carried up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. The combined payload of a 1,000-bomber raid exceeded 8 million pounds of high explosives dropped in hours. German industrial workers experienced American air power firsthand as their factories were systematically destroyed. The ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, the aircraft factories at Regensburg, the synthetic oil refineries that Germany desperately needed. Month after month, raid after raid, American bombers and their crews paid a terrible price in blood. But the bombers kept coming because American industry kept building them faster than German fighters could shoot them down. In the Pacific theater, B-24 seconds flew from bases in India, China, and Pacific Islands against Japanese positions. Their long range made them ideal for operations across vast ocean distances. They attacked Japanese shipping, bombed industrial targets, supported ground forces, and conducted reconnaissance. The versatility of the design allowed conversions for specialized roles. Some B-24 seconds became transports designated C-87 Liberator Express, carrying cargo and passengers. Others became C-109 fuel tankers supporting B-29 operations. The Navy operated PB-4Y1 variants as patrol bombers hunting submarines and surface ships. The production achievement at Willow Run represented more than numbers. It demonstrated that free democratic societies could mobilize industrial capacity on scales matching or exceeding totalitarian regimes. Nazi ideology insisted that only their authoritarian system could achieve the discipline and coordination necessary for modern warfare. Willow Run proved them catastrophically wrong. Free workers, voluntarily participating in production, motivated by patriotism rather than coercion, achieved production rates that German forced labor and regimented systems could not match. The social composition of Willow Run's workforce embodied American diversity that Nazi ideology claimed made nations weak. Women who had never worked in factories mastered complex technical skills. Workers from every American state and dozens of ethnic backgrounds collaborated effectively. The organizational complexity required to coordinate 42,000 workers, thousands of suppliers, constant design changes, and relentless production schedules exceeded anything German industry attempted. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The transformation achieved at Willow Run influenced American manufacturing permanently. The techniques pioneered there became case studies taught in business schools for decades. Production management, inventory control, quality assurance systems, and workforce training methods developed during the war-shaped post-war industry across all sectors. The ability to organize massive technical efforts became a characteristic American strength applied to peacetime projects, including interstate highways, space programs, and complex weapons systems. When the war ended, Willow Run's bomber production ceased immediately. The massive facility was no longer needed for military aircraft. Ford sold the plant to Kaiser Frazer Corporation, which produced automobiles there from 1947 to 1953. The site was later leased and eventually sold to General Motors, which operated there until 2010. Most of the original building was demolished in 2014, though a portion was preserved and now houses the Yankee Air Museum. The airfield continues operating as Willow Run Airport, serving cargo and general aviation, though commercial passenger service moved to Detroit Metropolitan Airport in 1966. The site, where 42,000 workers once built bombers at unprecedented rates, is now partly occupied by the American Center for Mobility, a proving ground for autonomous vehicles. The transformation from wartime bomber factory to peacetime airport and automotive testing facility reflects broader American transitions from military to civilian production. But the historic significance of Willow Run extends beyond its buildings or even its production numbers. The facility demonstrated capabilities that enemies had dismissed as impossible propaganda. It proved that industrial democracy could outproduce authoritarian systems. It showed that diversity strengthened rather than weakened national capacity. It revealed that American pragmatism and problem-solving culture could achieve what ideologically rigid systems could not imagine. The B-24 seconds built at Willow Run carried more than bombs. They carried proof that Nazi assumptions about American weakness were fatally wrong. They carried evidence that racial theories predicting American collapse had no basis in reality. They carried the weight of an industrial system so productive it could simultaneously equip American forces and supply allied nations while maintaining domestic prosperity. When German officers saw formations of hundreds of liberators filling European skies, they were witnessing the consequences of their leadership's catastrophic miscalculations. The story of Willow Run intersects with broader patterns of German intelligence failure regarding American capacity. Throughout 1942 and 43, German military intelligence received accurate reports of American production. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, was professionally competent and provided detailed assessments. But at command levels where strategic decisions were made, Nazi ideology filtered interpretation of evidence. Reports were dismissed as Allied propaganda. Statistics were assumed to be exaggerated. Even when German forces captured American equipment and tested it, the implications for total American productive capacity were minimized or ignored. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in North Africa, recognized American capabilities earlier than most German leaders. After initial engagements at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where German forces defeated inexperienced American troops, Rommel noted in his journal that the tactical conduct of the enemy's defense had been first class. They recovered very quickly after initial shock and soon succeeded in damming up our advance by grouping their reserves effectively. Later, Rommel acknowledged that American generals showed themselves very advanced in tactical handling of their forces. Most alarmingly to Rommel, American equipment arrived in staggering quantities. By May 1943, just 3 months after Kasserine Pass, American forces had driven Axis armies completely from North Africa. The lesson wasn't American incompetence, but American adaptability. The ability to learn from defeat, reorganize rapidly, and return stronger proved more valuable than initial tactical superiority. This flexibility derived partly from democratic culture that encouraged initiative and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. German tank crews who examined captured Shermans noted their excellent reliability and automotive engineering. War diaries recorded that American-built tanks had advantages in long-range fire and could successfully conduct firefights at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. When Germans captured a Sherman tank in Tunisia in February 1943, they shipped it to Kummersdorf Weapons Testing Center for detailed evaluation. The technical assessment contradicted propaganda. The Sherman was well built, reliable, and comfortable. German engineers described it as an automotive masterpiece the Germans could only dream of producing. But the strategic insight that should have alarmed German command was quantity rather than quality. For every Tiger tank Germany produced, America produced dozens of Shermans. Individual tank duels might favor superior German armor and guns, but campaigns were won through weight of numbers. If America could field 20 Shermans for every Tiger, the mathematics of attrition favored the Allies overwhelmingly. German tankers might destroy 3 or 4 Shermans before their Tiger was knocked out, but more Shermans kept coming because American factories kept building them. The same pattern applied to aircraft. German pilots acknowledged that individual American aircraft types had both strengths and weaknesses. The B-24 Liberator was less rugged than the B-17, flying fortress. It was more difficult to fly with heavy control forces. The positioning of fuel tanks made it prone to fires when hit, but these tactical weaknesses mattered less than strategic reality. America produced so many bombers that losses could be replaced faster than German fighters could shoot them down. By 1944, the Luftwaffe faced overwhelming numerical disadvantage. German pilots were being killed faster than replacements could be trained. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Manufacturing could not keep pace with combat losses. German aviation industry produced approximately 26,925 tanks during the entire war, from 1939 to 1945. America produced more tanks in 1943 alone. Aircraft production told an even starker story. Germany produced fighters and bombers through efficient factories using skilled workers. But total German aircraft production for the entire war was exceeded by American production in 1944 alone. The strategic bombing campaign that devastated German industry depended entirely on American productive capacity. Britain contributed bombers and aircrew, but the weight of metal falling on German cities came predominantly from American factories. Without Willow Run and facilities like it, the combined bomber offensive that destroyed German oil production, transportation networks, and industrial capacity could not have been sustained. Every raid lost dozens of bombers. Only American industry could replace those losses while simultaneously expanding the total force available. The psychological impact on German defenders was profound. Soldiers watching endless formations of American bombers passing overhead understood what it meant. Their propaganda had promised them that American industry was weak and inefficient. The reality filling the sky contradicted everything they had been told. If American air power was this overwhelming, what about American ground forces being equipped? What about American supplies sustaining Allied armies? The evidence accumulated until only the most ideologically blinded could deny it. By the time of D-Day on June 6, 1944, German defenders facing the Allied invasion watched approximately 11,590 Allied aircraft operate over Normandy on a single day. The Luftwaffe could field only approximately 319 to 815 serviceable aircraft in all of Western France. The ratio was roughly 37 Allied sorties for every German sortie. German commanders filing reports from Normandy acknowledged their impossible situation. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, wrote in his formal assessment 2 weeks after D-Day that the enemy's complete mastery in the air had rendered German defensive doctrine obsolete. Allied aircraft flew approximately 29,000 sorties in 2.5 days. About 2,300 aircraft daily dive-bombed and strafed every movement on the ground, even a single soldier. The movement of tanks by day in open country had become impossible. When von Rundstedt was asked what Germany should do, he replied with shocking bluntness, "Make peace, you idiots. What else can you do?" He was dismissed July 4th officially due to age and ill health. In reality, he had recognized what Hitler refused to accept. The war was lost. Germany no longer possessed capacity to defeat the forces arrayed against it. A major component of those overwhelming forces had rolled out of a single factory in Michigan that German intelligence had dismissed as impossible propaganda. The failure to believe evidence of Willow Run's production represented a broader pattern of German intelligence breakdown rooted in ideology. Nazi racial theories provided a framework that made accurate assessment of enemy capabilities literally impossible for those who accepted the ideology. If you believe that racial diversity weakens nations, that Jewish influence corrupts societies, that democracy makes countries militarily impotent, then evidence of American industrial supremacy must be reinterpreted or dismissed. The alternative, accepting that Nazi racial theories were wrong, was psychologically and politically impossible for true believers in the Reich. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, orchestrated relentless campaigns through his weekly newspaper Das Reich, portraying America as a nation in terminal decline. On August 9, 1942, Goebbels ridiculed America as God's country. Were it left to its own resources, he wrote, it would soon return once more to desert and prairie, as wide and empty as the souls of its people. He portrayed America as dependent on European civilization for everything of value, a young land lacking culture, education, and history. Goebbels attacked American military leadership with particular venom. His June 7, 1942, article titled Heroes and Film, Heroes specifically targeted General Douglas MacArthur as a coward for leaving Bataan before the April 10th surrender. Comparing MacArthur unfavorably to German generals, Goebbels concluded that the momentary fame of American film heroes would melt along with the wax in Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. This propaganda wasn't intended solely for German public consumption. German leadership genuinely believed these characterizations. They convinced themselves that American society was so corrupted and divided it could never sustain effective military effort. The disconnect between propaganda and reality created cognitive dissonance that German intelligence officers experienced daily. They received reconnaissance photographs showing hundreds of bombers at American airfields. They intercepted communications detailing production schedules. They captured American equipment and tested it. All the evidence pointed toward industrial capacity that exceeded German production by massive margins. But accepting that evidence required rejecting fundamental Nazi beliefs about racial superiority and American degeneracy. At lower levels of German intelligence, some officers understood the truth. They compiled accurate reports. They assessed American capabilities realistically. But as reports moved up the chain of command, they were filtered through ideological lenses. Senior officers who accepted Nazi theories dismissed reports that contradicted those theories. Hitler himself refused to believe assessments of American strength. When presented with evidence of massive American production, he assumed the figures were exaggerated or included obsolete equipment. The systematic rejection of evidence had strategic consequences that compounded over time. If German planners had accurately assessed American industrial capacity in 1941 and 42, they might have pursued different strategies. They might have recognized that time favored their enemies. They might have understood that every month of continued war allowed American industry to build strength. They might have sought negotiated settlements before American productive power became overwhelming. Instead, Nazi ideology convinced them that time favored Germany because racially superior warriors would ultimately prevail over mongrel democracies, regardless of material disparities. This fundamental miscalculation about American capacity derived from misunderstanding what made America strong. Nazi ideology focused obsessively on racial purity as source of national strength. American diversity, which Nazis viewed as fatal weakness, was actually source of strategic advantage. The very pluralism that Hitler mocked enabled industrial mobilization that Germany could never match. Consider the workforce at Willow Run. By mid-1944, the 42,000 workers represented America's diversity. Women comprised roughly one-third of the workforce. These were housewives, teachers, secretaries, shop clerks, who had answered the call for defense workers. They learned to rivet aluminum sheets, install electrical systems, operate precision machinery. Many worked in leadership roles, supervising assembly teams and testing completed aircraft. The famous Rosie the Riveter wasn't just propaganda. She represented real women whose labor made American air superiority possible. Rose Will Monroe, one of the actual riveters at Willow Run, became a model for recruitment posters. Born in Kentucky, Monroe was a widow with 2 daughters when she took a job at Willow Run in 1942. She worked as a riveter on the night shift building B-24 Seconds. Her story epitomized millions of American women who entered industrial workforce during war years. They proved capable of mastering complex technical work that had been exclusively male domain before the war. They maintained production schedules despite long hours and difficult conditions. They understood that every bomber they built might save American lives in combat. The social transformation at Willow Run extended beyond gender. African Americans found opportunities in defense industries that had been closed before the war. While discrimination persisted even in wartime, urgent need for labor opened doors. Black workers operated machinery, performed skilled tasks, and contributed to production that Nazi racial theories insisted they were incapable of mastering. Their presence in American factories doing sophisticated technical work contradicted every assumption about racial hierarchy that Nazi ideology promoted. Workers came from every American region. Southerners who had lived through Depression poverty found good wages at Willow Run. Midwestern farmers' sons learned industrial skills. Urban workers from Detroit and other cities brought experience from automobile factories. This geographic diversity created workforce with varied perspectives and adaptability that proved valuable for solving production problems. When challenges arose, workers from different backgrounds contributed different approaches until solutions emerged. The immigrant heritage of many workers also contradicted Nazi theories. America was built by successive waves of immigration. Irish, Italian, Polish, German, Scandinavian, Jewish, and countless other ethnic groups had come to America seeking opportunity. Their descendants worked side by side at Willow Run. This ethnic mixing that Nazis condemned as race pollution created dynamic culture of innovation and problem-solving. Different traditions and perspectives combined to generate solutions that homogeneous societies might not discover. Nazi ideology predicted that such diversity would create conflict and weakness. Instead, it created strength. Workers focused on common goal, defeating fascism regardless of their different backgrounds. Patriotism united people who might have little else in common. The factory floor became space where differences mattered less than shared purpose. This social cohesion, achieved through voluntary cooperation rather than coercion, proved more durable and effective than regimented unity imposed by authoritarian control. The training systems at Willow Run demonstrated American pragmatism. Before the war, skilled trades required lengthy apprenticeships lasting years. The urgency of wartime production demanded faster methods. The apprentice school at Willow Run developed intensive courses teaching specific skills quickly. Visual aids, hands-on practice, and structured curricula replaced informal mentoring that had characterized traditional apprenticeships. Workers learned what they needed to know to perform their jobs effectively, without spending years mastering trades broadly. This training innovation proved remarkably effective. People with no industrial experience could become productive workers within weeks or months rather than years. The system challenged assumptions about expertise and credentials. It demonstrated that intelligence and capability were widely distributed across society, regardless of formal education or background. Given proper training and opportunity, ordinary people could master complex technical work. This democratic approach to skill development became another American advantage that authoritarian systems struggled to match. The organizational complexity required to coordinate Willow Run's operations exceeded anything attempted in German industry. Materials from thousands of suppliers across America had to arrive on precise schedules: aluminum sheets from Alcoa, engines from Pratt & Whitney, instruments from specialized manufacturers, hydraulic components, tires, electrical systems, weapons, radios, navigation equipment. Each of the 1,550,000 parts that comprised a B-24 had to be manufactured, inspected, transported, and assembled in correct sequence. The logistics challenge was immense. Railroad cars delivered materials constantly. Trucks moved components between buildings. Overhead cranes lifted heavy assemblies. Conveyor systems transported smaller parts. Storage warehouses held inventory organized for rapid retrieval. The entire supply chain had to function smoothly or production would halt. Any bottleneck anywhere in the system created ripple effects through the entire operation. Ford's management team applied lessons learned from automobile production, but adapted them to aircraft manufacturing's greater complexity. They used statistical methods to track production rates and identify problems. They implemented quality control systems that caught defects early before they propagated through subsequent assembly stages. They coordinated schedules so that sub-assemblies arrived at main assembly line exactly when needed, without creating storage backlogs. This level of organizational sophistication required management capabilities that went far beyond traditional factory supervision. It required systems thinking and process optimization and continuous improvement. Ford's engineers constantly analyzed production data, looking for inefficiencies. They redesigned fixtures and tools to make operations faster and more reliable. They experimented with different sequences and layouts, seeking optimal flow. The culture of continuous improvement became one of Willow Run's most valuable attributes. German aviation industry lacked this systematic approach to optimization. Aircraft production remained partly artisanal, even in factories. Skilled craftsmen used judgment and experience to fit components. Quality depended on individual workers' expertise rather than on precision tooling and statistical control. This produced excellent aircraft but limited production rates. Germany never achieved the scale that American mass production methods enabled. The fundamental difference was philosophical. German industry valued craftsmanship. American industry valued systems and processes that made craftsmanship less necessary. The contrast reflected broader cultural differences. German culture emphasized hierarchy and expertise, and traditional authority. American culture emphasized pragmatism and innovation, and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. When Ford's engineers proposed building bombers on assembly lines, traditional aviation experts said it was impossible. Ford didn't accept that judgment. They experimented and adapted and persisted until they made it work. This cultural willingness to attempt the supposedly impossible gave America strategic advantage that ideology-bound opponents could not match. The technological innovations developed at Willow Run had applications beyond aircraft. The precision measurement systems required for aircraft tolerances advanced manufacturing metrology. The automated machinery developed for wing assembly pioneered computer numerical control systems. The quality control statistical methods became standard across industries. The training techniques influenced post-war technical education. The management approaches shaped business school curricula for decades. Willow Run became a case study in organizational excellence taught to generations of managers and engineers. But perhaps the most significant innovation was demonstrating that mass production could be applied to products of extraordinary complexity. Before Willow Run, conventional wisdom held that aircraft required individual craftsmanship. The B-24, with its 1,550,000 parts, seemed too complex for assembly line production. Ford proved otherwise. This opened possibilities for mass-producing other complex products, from computers to medical equipment to consumer electronics. The lessons learned, building bombers influenced manufacturing philosophy permanently. The human cost of Willow Run's achievement deserves acknowledgement. Industrial work was demanding and often dangerous. Factories operated around the clock on 3 shifts. Workers handled heavy machinery, dangerous chemicals, and high temperatures. Falls from scaffolding injured workers. Machinery malfunctions caused accidents. The urgency of production sometimes led to inadequate safety measures. Workers accepted risks because they understood stakes. Each day of delayed production potentially meant more casualties among soldiers fighting overseas. The workers knew their labor directly affected whether their sons and husbands and brothers would come home alive. This knowledge sustained them through long shifts and difficult conditions and personal sacrifices. They endured separation from families who remained in distant home states. They lived in crowded temporary housing. They dealt with shortages and rationing. They postponed personal dreams and ambitions. They did so willingly because defeating fascism required it. The emotional burden of war production weighed heavily on those who built weapons. Every bomber that rolled off Willow Run's assembly line would carry 11 American airmen into combat. Many of those men would not return. The workers who built the aircraft understood this reality. They read casualty reports in newspapers. They attended memorial services for friends' sons and nephews. They lived with knowledge that their work involved life and death stakes far beyond ordinary industrial employment. Yet, they persisted. Production never stopped. Through winter, cold and summer heat, through personal tragedies and family emergencies, through fatigue and stress, the work continued. 42,000 people maintained focus on mission that required everything they could give. Their dedication represented form of patriotism as genuine as anything displayed by soldiers in combat. They fought the war from factory floor rather than battlefield, but their contribution was equally essential to victory. The end of bomber production in June 1945 brought mixed emotions: relief that the war was over, pride in accomplishment, uncertainty about future. Many women workers were encouraged to leave their jobs to make room for returning veterans. Some resented being forced out of positions they had mastered and found satisfying. The experience of working, earning good wages, exercising skills had changed them. The post-war expectation that they would happily return to purely domestic roles ignored transformation that had occurred. Similarly, African American workers who had found good jobs at Willow Run faced renewed discrimination when peace returned. The wartime gains in employment and income proved temporary for many minority workers. These frustrations would contribute to social movements demanding equality in post-war years. The women's movement that emerged in the 1960s and 70s drew partly on memories of wartime factory work. The civil rights movement gained energy from veterans and war workers who had contributed to defeating fascism but still faced discrimination at home. The reconversion to civilian production proceeded more smoothly than many feared. Automobile production resumed rapidly at other Ford facilities. Consumer goods that had been unavailable during war years flooded markets. Americans who had saved money because there was little to buy during war suddenly had purchasing power. Pent-up demand drove economic boom that sustained prosperity through the 1950s and 60s. The factory skills workers learned at Willow Run transferred to peacetime employment. The organizational capabilities managers developed applied to peacetime businesses. The industrial capacity built during war continued benefiting economy for decades. Willow Run's achievement influenced the Cold War that followed World War II. American ability to mobilize industrial resources impressed Soviet leaders who understood they could not match American productive capacity. The massive military establishment maintained after the war depended on industrial base that could simultaneously produce consumer abundance and military hardware. This dual capability that Soviet command economy could never match gave America strategic advantage throughout Cold War decades. The techniques pioneered at Willow Run informed production of everything from jet aircraft to missiles to space vehicles. The facility's influence extended internationally. Marshall Plan assistance that rebuilt Western Europe after the war was possible only because American productive capacity could supply both domestic needs and international commitments. American factories produced machinery and vehicles and equipment that European nations needed to reconstruct their economies. This generosity served American interests by creating prosperous trading partners and allies, but it was only possible because American industrial capacity exceeded domestic requirements. That excess capacity had been built during war and sustained afterward. The contrast between American and Soviet industrial systems became increasingly apparent during Cold War. Soviet Union achieved impressive production of military equipment through command economy and forced labor, but they could never match American ability to produce military strength and consumer prosperity simultaneously. Soviet citizens endured persistent shortages and limited consumer goods, while American affluence continued expanding. This contrast between Western prosperity and Eastern deprivation ultimately undermined Soviet legitimacy. When Soviet system finally collapsed in 1989 to 1991, the outcome reflected economic competition that Soviets had lost decades earlier. The lessons of Willow Run remained relevant long after the factory stopped building bombers. The experience demonstrated that free societies, when threatened, could mobilize resources and organize efforts on scale matching or exceeding authoritarian regimes. The production achievements proved that free people working voluntarily toward common goals could outproduce coerced labor. The industrial might that won the war became foundation for lasting prosperity and global influence. The arsenal of democracy had fulfilled its purpose through creative capacity of its people and productive power of its industry. German intelligence officers who dismissed reports of Willow Run's production as impossible propaganda had failed to understand fundamental truth. Industrial capacity in democratic society derives from voluntary cooperation and innovation and pragmatic problem-solving. These attributes emerge from freedom rather than coercion, from diversity rather than homogeneity, from culture that values results over ideology. Nazi Germany, with its rigid hierarchies and racial obsessions and ideological certainties, could never match the adaptive creativity of American industry. The 650 B-24 seconds per month that Willow Run planned to produce by autumn 1944 represented more than aircraft. They represented failure of Nazi ideology to comprehend reality. They represented triumph of democratic pragmatism over authoritarian rigidity. They represented vindication of diversity over racial purity. They represented proof that free people pursuing common purpose could achieve what coerced populations never could. Every bomber that flew from Willow Run carried this message, even if German officers refused to hear it. The facility demonstrated capabilities that changed warfare permanently. Before Willow Run, military planners assumed that aircraft production would always be limited by availability of skilled craftsmen. Complex machines like heavy bombers would always be produced slowly in small numbers by experts. Willow Run shattered these assumptions. It proved that even the most complex machines could be mass-produced by ordinary workers given proper training and systems. This realization transformed military planning. Quantity became achievable goal rather than distant dream. Air forces could grow to sizes previously unimaginable. The strategic bombing campaigns that devastated German and Japanese industry would have been impossible without production capacity that facilities like Willow Run provided. Britain could not have sustained bomber offensive alone. Soviet Union focused resources on ground forces. Only American industry could supply bombers in numbers sufficient to overwhelm enemy air defenses and systematically destroy industrial capacity. The combined bomber offensive that prepared way for D-Day and subsequent victory depended entirely on productive capacity that Nazi ideology insisted was impossible. The irony was profound. German leadership dismissed American production as propaganda, precisely when that production was becoming a decisive factor in their defeat. The bombers filling European skies had rolled off assembly lines in Michigan that German intelligence refused to believe existed at reported scale. The crews flying those bombers were sustained by industrial capacity that produced everything from engines to ammunition to spare parts faster than combat consumed them. The overwhelming material superiority that Allied forces enjoyed by 1944 derived largely from American factories that Nazi racial theories predicted would fail. When German soldiers watched endless formations of American bombers passing overhead in 1944, they experienced cognitive dissonance between propaganda they had been taught and reality they witnessed. Their leaders had promised that racially pure Germany would triumph over mongrel America. The sky filled with American aircraft suggested otherwise. Their propaganda had claimed American industry was weak and inefficient. The bombs falling on their positions suggested otherwise. Their ideology had predicted American society would fracture under war's stress. The coordinated industrial might evident in every raid suggested otherwise. Some German soldiers began, questioning what they had been told. If propaganda was wrong about American weakness, what else might be wrong? If racial theories predicting American collapse were false, what did that say about Nazi ideology? These questions were dangerous in totalitarian state where doubt could be fatal. Most soldiers kept doubts private, but the seeds of disillusionment grew as evidence accumulated that everything they had been taught was based on lies. The bombers from Willow Run carried not just explosives, but truth that shattered ideological certainties. The final irony was that Germany possessed intelligence about American capabilities, but chose to disbelieve it. This wasn't failure of reconnaissance or analysis. German intelligence services were professionally competent. They gathered accurate information. The failure occurred at command level, where ideology filtered evidence. Reports that contradicted Nazi assumptions were dismissed regardless of supporting evidence. This systematic rejection of inconvenient truth guaranteed strategic failure, because strategy based on false assumptions cannot succeed. The pattern repeated across multiple domains. German intelligence reported American tank production accurately, but command dismissed figures as exaggerated. German intelligence reported American aircraft production accurately, but command assumed statistics included obsolete models. German intelligence reported American shipbuilding accurately, but command believed vessels must be inferior quality. At every point where evidence contradicted ideology, German leadership chose ideology. This choice lost them the war. Willow Run stood as monument to what Germans chose not to believe. The mile-long assembly line producing bomber every hour was not propaganda. It was reality documented in photographs and production records and testimony from thousands who worked there. The 8,685 bombers built there were not imaginary. They flew combat missions over Europe. German soldiers saw them. German civilians heard them overhead. German industry felt their bombs. Yet German command structure could never fully accept what this achievement meant about American capacity, because accepting it required abandoning Nazi ideology that formed basis of their worldview. This failure to accept reality demonstrated fundamental weakness of totalitarian systems. When ideology becomes more important than truth, when leaders value conformity over accuracy, when questioning assumptions is forbidden, strategic failure becomes inevitable. Democratic societies, with their messy debates and competing perspectives and tolerance for dissent, possess advantage of reality testing that authoritarian systems lack. American leaders made mistakes too, but democratic process allowed criticism and correction in ways totalitarian systems could not permit. The workers at Willow Run never knew that German intelligence dismissed their achievement as impossible, propaganda. They simply did their jobs. They showed up for shifts. They built bombers. They went home. They returned next day and built more bombers. Their dedication derived not from ideology, but from practical understanding that defeating fascism required maximum effort from everyone. This unpretentious patriotism proved more durable and effective than grandiose ideological enthusiasm that Nazi system tried to generate through propaganda and coercion. The ordinariness of Willow Run's workforce was precisely what made their achievement so extraordinary. These were not specially selected elite workers. They were normal Americans who learned specialized skills quickly and applied them diligently. The system that enabled their productivity was not mystical or unique to American culture. It was pragmatic application of industrial organization principles that could be taught and replicated, but it required cultural values, freedom, pragmatism, willingness to innovate that totalitarian systems struggled to foster. The legacy of Willow Run extends beyond numbers and dates. It represents a moment when American industrial democracy proved itself capable of achievements that skeptics declared impossible. It demonstrated that diversity strengthens rather than weakens. It showed that free people voluntarily cooperating can accomplish more than coerced populations following orders. It revealed that ideology divorced from reality leads to catastrophic failure, regardless how sincerely beliefs are held. These lessons remained relevant long after last bomber left the factory. They apply to challenges beyond warfare. They speak to fundamental questions about human organization and motivation and capability. They remind us that extraordinary achievements often come from ordinary people given opportunity and training and purpose. They demonstrate that pragmatic focus on results matters more than ideological purity. They prove that diversity of thought and background creates 2000 copper, strength rather than weakness. The German officers who refused to believe Willow Run's production figures made understandable mistake given their ideological framework. They had been taught that racial purity created strength. They had been promised that authoritarian efficiency would triumph over democratic chaos. They had been assured that American mongrel society would collapse under war's stress. When evidence contradicted these teachings, they faced choice between revising beliefs or rejecting evidence. They chose to maintain beliefs. This choice seemed safe and comfortable in moment. In retrospect, it guaranteed their defeat. Willow Run built 650 bombers per month, not despite American diversity, but partly because of it. The women who riveted aluminum brought perspectives men might miss. The workers from different regions contributed varied problem-solving approaches. The mixture of urban and rural workers combined different skill sets. The ethnic diversity reflected in surnames on factory rolls represented traditions and experiences from around the world. This diversity created adaptive, creative workforce that homogeneous population could not match. The facility's achievement vindicated American experiment in pluralistic democracy. The founders had created a system based on individual liberty and democratic governance and cultural diversity. Critics, including Nazi theorists, predicted such system would prove weak and chaotic. Willow Run and thousands of other American factories demonstrated otherwise. They proved that freedom unleashes human potential more effectively than coercion. They showed that diversity strengthens rather than weakens when united by common purpose. They revealed that democracy can organize and mobilize as effectively as totalitarianism while maintaining values worth defending. When last B-24 rolled off Willow Run's assembly line on June 28, 1945, it marked end of unprecedented industrial achievement. 8,685 heavy bombers built by facility that skeptics said would never succeed. Production rate of 1 bomber every hour that experts declared impossible. Workforce of 42,000, including thousands of women and minority workers that conventional wisdom said could not master complex technical work. All accomplished by free people working voluntarily in democratic society that Nazi ideology predicted would collapse. The bombers themselves had limited post-war life. Most were rapidly scrapped after war ended. The B-24 design became obsolete as jet aircraft emerged. Of 18,000 plus Liberators built, fewer than 20 survive today in museums or private collections. The physical aircraft vanished, but their impact endured. They helped win war against fascism. They demonstrated American industrial capacity. They proved capabilities that enemies had dismissed as propaganda. They carried message that totalitarian ideology had failed to. They comprehend truth about democratic strength. Willow Run itself transformed into different purposes. Automobile production, storage facility, eventually largely demolished. The site where history was made became ordinary industrial property. Visitors today see few reminders of wartime achievement except preserved museum portion and historical markers. The massive assembly line is gone. The turntables that allowed 90-degree turn are gone. The infrastructure that supported 42,000 workers is gone. Physical traces of achievement have largely disappeared, yet the legacy persists in ways less tangible but more important. The management techniques pioneered there influenced American business for generations. The training methods shaped technical education. The production systems became case studies teaching industrial organization. The demonstration that complex products could be mass-produced changed manufacturing philosophy permanently. The proof that diverse free workforce could outproduce homogeneous, coerced labor validated democratic values. These impacts matter more than physical artifacts. Most importantly, Willow Run demonstrated that totalitarian ideology based on racial theories and authoritarian control and contempt for democracy was catastrophically wrong. The Nazis convinced themselves that American diversity meant weakness. Willow Run proved them wrong. They assured themselves that democratic chaos could never match authoritarian efficiency. Willow Run proved them wrong. They predicted that American society would collapse under war's stress. Willow Run proved them wrong. Every assumption of Nazi ideology collided with reality at facilities like Willow Run and Shattered. The 650 bombers per month represented more than metal and engines. They represented failure of ideology to comprehend reality. They represented triumph of pragmatism over dogma. They represented vindication of diversity over purity. They represented proof that freedom produces strength rather than weakness. The German intelligence officers, who dismissed production figures as impossible propaganda, were not stupid or incompetent. They simply could not believe evidence that contradicted their entire worldview. Their failure was not intellectual but ideological, and it cost them everything. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.